I should have known better. Winter hiking alone is dangerous. Winter hiking alone on Mount Washington, notorious for some of the worst weather in the world, is beyond reckless. But I was green, eager, and too naive to understand just how fast things could go sideways. It started like any other trip, packing up, checking the weather forecast, or at least glancing at it, thinking I understood, and lacing up my boots with a sense of excitement. My dog, always ready for an adventure, wagged his tail beside me, oblivious to what we were about to step into. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that bites at any exposed skin and makes your breath hang heavy in the air. My plan was simple: ascend via the Tuckerman Ravine Trail, take in the view, and descend before conditions worsened. The trail was packed with boot prints from other hikers, and I fell into a false sense of security, following the path blindly without questioning where it led. The climb was steady, the snow beneath my feet crunching with each step. My dog trotted ahead, his paws sinking slightly with each bound, but he seemed happy enough. I had my snowshoes strapped to my pack, figuring I'd put them on when the snow got deeper. As I made my way up the left gully of Tuckerman's Ravine, the boot tracks I had been following suddenly vanished into a wind-blown drift. That should have been my first warning sign. A more experienced hiker would have stopped, reevaluated, and turned around. But I wasn't experienced. I hesitated, scanning the slope above me, realizing I had climbed higher than I intended. The incline was steep, steeper than I felt comfortable descending. My heart pounded as I realized going down looked riskier than going up. My only choice, or so I thought, was to keep climbing. I focused on each step, digging my boots into the snow, gripping my hiking pole tightly. The higher I climbed, the more the snow felt loose, like it couldn't quite hold my weight. I reached a point where I had to move sideways, angling toward a more stable section of the ravine. That's when it happened. The snow beneath me collapsed. I felt weightless for a terrifying second before gravity took over. The world spun as I tumbled, my arms flailing, my hiking pole wrenched from my grip. I hit hard, the impact rattling my bones, but I kept sliding. My brain screamed at me to stop, but the mountain didn't care. Snow rushed around me, the slope swallowing me as I plunged downward. I dug my hands into the snow, desperate for anything to grab onto. My fingers burned with the cold, my gloves doing little to protect them. Then instinct took over. I jammed my remaining hiking pole into the slope, pressing my body against it, using every bit of strength I had left to slow my fall. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't work. Then my body jerked to a stop. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest heaving as I tried to process what had just happened. Snow clung to every inch of me, and pain radiated from my back where I had slammed into the mountain. I didn't want to move, didn't want to risk slipping again. I forced myself to look up. My dog was still above me, standing at the top of the ravine, watching. He hadn't fallen. He had made it, but now he wouldn't move. He stood like a statue, tail tucked, ears back, too scared to come down, too stubborn to turn around. I had no choice. I couldn't stay where I was. I had to get back up to him. But my fall had shattered any confidence I had left. Every step forward felt like I was tempting fate, daring the mountain to take another shot at me. I needed a different route. I spotted a rocky outcropping to my right, mostly ice with patches of exposed rock. It was the only thing that looked stable. With slow, deliberate movements, I made my way toward it, testing each foothold before shifting my weight. My body ached, my back screaming in protest with every movement. The cold was creeping in, leeching the strength from my limbs. Time didn't exist in that moment. It was just me, the ice, and the desperate need to reach the top. Finally, I pulled myself onto the rocky section, my gloved hands scraping against the ice. The wind hit me like a freight train the moment I reached the top. 40, maybe 50 miles per hour, a relentless force that stole the breath from my lungs. My dog whined, pressed low to the ground, ears flattened against his head. We weren't safe yet. The only way back was across the exposed bowl at the top of the ravine. There was no cover, nowhere to hide from the wind that threatened to knock me off balance with every step. I tried to move quickly, but my body wasn't cooperating. My left snowshoe had taken damage in the fall. The frame bent, one of the bindings ripped. It barely stayed on my foot. I had duct tape in my pack. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I knelt in the snow, my fingers clumsy and numb as I wrapped the tape around my boot, securing the broken snowshoe as best as I could. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. Then I started moving. Each step was a battle. The snow was deep, and I kept post-holing up to my hips, my legs vanishing beneath the surface with every other step. My broken snowshoe barely stayed on, forcing me to crawl at times just to keep moving. My dog stayed close, sensing my struggle, his body pressed against my leg as if he could shield me from the wind. I don't know how long it took. Minutes? Hours? Felt like forever. When I finally made it to the standard winter route, relief washed over me. The trail was still brutal, but it was a path, a direction, something I could follow. Descending was painful. My back throbbed, my muscles exhausted from the ordeal. Every step jarred my spine, but I pushed forward, focused on one goal, getting below Treeline. The moment we stepped into the trees, everything changed. The wind still howled above, but here, beneath the canopy, there was a sense of safety, a barrier between me and the mountain's wrath. I took my first deep breath in what felt like hours, my body sagging with exhaustion. The final stretch to the car was slow, every step a reminder of my mistakes, of how close I had come to real disaster. When I finally reached my car, I collapsed onto the front seat, my dog curling up beside me. I sat there for a long time, the engine running, the heat blasting, trying to process everything that had happened. I had been lucky, too lucky. Took weeks for my back to recover, but the mental scars lasted longer. I had gone into that hike thinking I knew enough, thinking I could handle whatever the mountain threw at me. I had been wrong. Mount Washington didn't care about my confidence. It didn't care that I had a dog with me or that I was inexperienced. It showed me, in the most brutal way possible, just how unprepared I had been. That day changed me. I didn't stop hiking, but I stopped underestimating the mountains. I learned, I trained, and I made damn sure I never put myself or my dog in that kind of danger again. Mount Washington had given me a second chance. Next time, I wouldn't rely on luck to survive. I grew up hearing about the John Muir Trail. My mom hiked it every year, sometimes alone, sometimes with a friend, but always fast and light. She had a system, a way of doing things. No unnecessary weight, no luxuries, not even toilet paper, just a trowel and some leaves. She always told me that weight mattered. Every extra ounce slowed you down. If you were moving through the wilderness for weeks at a time, you didn't waste energy on things you didn't need. She carried the lightest tent she could afford, a tiny stove, exactly enough food to make it to the next resupply. Her pack never went over 20 pounds. That was why, when I started looking into lightweight handguns, I realized none of them made sense for what she did. The lightest ones were still 6 or 7 ounces. That was more than a tent stake, more than a small bottle of water, more than the entire weight of her first aid kit. If she didn't carry toilet paper, why would she ever carry a gun? But that was before I understood what was really out there. Last summer, I finally decided to go with her. I wasn't as experienced as her, but I was in decent shape and I wanted to see what she saw. I wanted to understand why she did this year after year, alone in the mountains with nothing but what she carried on her back. We started in Yosemite. The first few days were hard, but manageable. My pack felt too heavy, even though I trimmed it down as much as I could. Mom moved like a ghost over the trails, light and quick. She wasn't much for talking out here. Her focus was on movement, efficiency, keeping everything running smoothly. At night, we camped off-trail, away from the more popular sites. She said it was safer that way, less chance of running into people who might be a problem. That was the first time I really thought about it. I had spent weeks worrying about bears, mountain lions, hypothermia, dehydration, but she wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about people, and she didn't have a gun. The man on the ridge. It was our 6th night when I saw him. We had set up camp just below a rocky ridge, next to a small creek. I was boiling water for dinner when I glanced up and saw movement along the top of the ridge. A dark shape against the sky. Person. He was standing there, watching. I froze. The fire crackled. My mom was behind me, rolling out her sleeping pad. I didn't say anything. I just kept my eyes on him. He stood there for what felt like forever, then turned and walked away. When I finally told her, she didn't even look up from what she was doing. Could have been another hiker, she said. Could have been a ranger. Why wouldn't they say anything? I asked. She shrugged. Some people just like to keep to themselves. But she didn't seem convinced. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the trees made me jump. The wind, the rustling leaves, the shifting of the tent fabric. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure on the ridge, watching. The next day, I started noticing things. A boot print in the dirt that wasn't ours. A broken branch where someone had stepped off the trail. Little things that made my skin crawl. Mom saw them too. I could tell because she changed the way she moved. She started picking trails that were harder to follow, cutting through granite fields where footprints didn't last. She stopped making fires at night. She never said why. I didn't ask. That afternoon, we passed another hiker heading northbound. A skinny guy, early 20s, looking rough around the edges. He asked if we had seen anyone else recently. A guy, maybe 40, beard, red jacket? I shook my head. Mom didn't say anything. The guy nodded. If you do, be careful. He's been following people. I saw him a few days ago, just standing off the trail, watching. Then again last night, closer. Didn't say anything. My stomach nodded. Mom nodded like this was normal. Thanks for the heads up. The guy nodded back and kept walking. We didn't talk about it. But that night, we camped deep in the trees, miles from the trail. The noise in the night. I woke up to a sound. A snap. A branch breaking. Close. I held my breath, heart hammering. I could hear my mom shifting in her tent. She was awake too. Then another sound. Footsteps. Not an animal. Not a bear. Slow, careful steps. Someone was out there. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My mom's tent was silent. She was waiting too. The footsteps stopped. Minutes passed. The wind moved through the trees. My skin crawled. Then finally, soft, retreating steps. Moving away. We didn't sleep after that. At dawn, my mom made the call. We're getting off the trail. We packed fast, moving in silence. No breakfast, no coffee. Just stuffing gear into our packs and getting out. She picked a direction that cut away from the trail, down into a rocky valley where no one would follow unless they really wanted to. I kept looking back. I didn't see anyone, but I could feel it. Someone had been out there, close enough to hear us breathe. Getting out, we hiked hard. No breaks, just miles and miles of fast movement, cutting through rough terrain, keeping off the main trail. By noon, we were near a ranger station. Mom finally stopped. She turned to me, face tight, and said, "We're reporting this. We told the rangers everything. The man on the ridge, the boot prints, the footsteps at night, the northbound hiker who had seen him too. They took it seriously. One of them radioed for another ranger to check the area. Probably just some guy out here, seeing what he can get away with," one of them said. "Happens more than you'd think." That sentence stuck with me. Happens more than you'd think. We got a ride to the nearest town. That night, in a cheap motel, I thought about the gun again. 6 or 7 ounces. Too much weight. But what if we had needed it? What if he had come into camp? What if we hadn't woken up in time? My mom had been hiking this trail for years. She had always said she didn't need extra weight, didn't need a gun. But she had never looked as shaken as she did when we sat in that ranger station, explaining what happened. Some weight is worth carrying. Some things are worth their weight. I don't know if she'll carry a gun next time, but I will. We weren't even hiking. It was just a car camping trip. A weekend away from everything, way out in the middle of nowhere on BLM land in Colorado. Miles of nothing in every direction. Forest, dirt roads, silence. The kind of place where you don't see another person all day, where the nearest town is a dot on the map, and cell service is just a memory. We drove deep, an hour and a half down a Forest Service road. No traffic, no campsites, not even an old truck parked on the side of the road. Just endless trees, the occasional clearing, and mountains in the distance. I remember feeling good about the spot we found. Flat ground, a decent fire pit, plenty of space between the trees so it didn't feel claustrophobic. We set up fast, tents, firewood, chairs. 3 cars, 8 of us. It felt safe in a way that only deep isolation can. Out here, nothing sneaks up on you. You can hear a car on that road from miles away, headlights cutting through the dark long before it reaches you. No one just appears. That's what made it so much worse. We spent the evening the way you'd expect. Drinking, eating, laughing. The guys handled the cooking, flipping burgers over the fire while the rest of us sat around, talking about nothing. It was one of those nights where the air was still and heavy, the kind where the sky is so dark you forget light pollution exists. Nobody talked about anything scary. No ghost stories, no weird vibes, nothing like that. It was just normal. By the time we finished eating and cleaned up, it was full dark. Someone suggested checking the cars before turning in, just to make sure we had everything we needed. We'd parked them maybe 30 yards away, just past the firelight. That was when everything changed. The slashes. I remember the sound first, that soft, unnatural hiss. At first, I thought someone had stepped on something. A water bottle maybe, or the hiss of a cooling engine. But as we got closer to the cars, the sound got sharper, more constant. Then someone's flashlight hit the tires. The front right tire of each car was flat, completely shredded, not just punctured, slashed. I remember standing there trying to make sense of it. The way the cuts were identical, the way it had happened to all 3 vehicles. Then the panic hit. It was like a switch flipped in all of us at the same time. First, disbelief. Someone thought it was a prank. But then, no, this wasn't that. Nobody had been alone long enough to do this. It wasn't an accident either. The slashes were deep, long, clean. A blade, a box cutter, maybe. Someone had done this, deliberately, and they had done it without any of us hearing a damn thing. I don't think I've ever felt fear like that before. Not the creeping kind, not the kind that builds up in your head. This was different. This was immediate, raw, gut-level terror. We were trapped. No cell service. No way to call for help. Sure, we had spares, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that someone had been here. Someone had crept up, slashed all of our tires, and then, what? Left? Or were they still watching? Every single one of us had the same thought at the same time. Whoever did this was still out there, watching, waiting. Nobody wanted to split up, but we had no choice. We had to get the tires swapped out fast, and we only had 1 gun between us. So one guy stood watch, gun in hand, while the rest of us scrambled. Hands shaking, sweat dripping down our backs, struggling to get the spares on as fast as possible. I kept looking up, into the trees, into the dark. Nothing, but it felt like something was there. Felt wrong the way the forest felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. I kept expecting to see movement, a shape between the trees, a shadow slipping behind the cars. My skin crawled with the feeling of being watched. The headlights from the cars lit up the trees beyond us, but the forest swallowed the light, leaving only endless blackness. Anything could have been out there. It took less than 10 minutes to get the tires swapped. Felt like an eternity. The second the last car was ready, we tore out of there. Nobody talked. Nobody even breathed. Just 3 sets of headlights punching through the dark, engines roaring as we raced back toward the highway. I remember my hands gripping the seat, knuckles white. Every time we hit a bump, I thought I'd see something in the rearview mirror. But we didn't stop. Not until we saw pavement again. We made it back to the main road. Called the cops the second we had service. They listened, told us it was good we were armed, and that was that. They said they'd check it out, but out there, what could they really do? No cameras, no neighbors, no way to know who had been out there watching us. No way to know what they had planned. The weight of it. I still think about it. The silence. The way it happened without a sound. The fact that someone had been close enough to touch our cars without any of us noticing. And the worst part? They didn't have to slash all the tires. They could have slashed just one per car. But they didn't. They did the exact same one on every single vehicle. Like it was planned. Like it was calculated. Like they wanted us to know they had been there. Like they wanted us to feel it. And I do. I still feel it. Every time I think about going back out there. I like to hike alone. I know that bothers some people, but I don't care. The woods near my town stretch for miles, thick and tangled, with old trails winding through them like veins. I know them well. I've spent more nights out there than I can count, sometimes walking until dawn, watching the sun rise through the trees. Most nights, it's peaceful. Just me, the wind, the trees, and the crunch of my boots on the dirt. But one night, I found something I still can't explain. It was late, well past midnight. The kind of night where the air feels heavy and the silence settles deep. No traffic noise, no distant hum of life, just the woods stretching out in all directions. I had been walking for hours, following a deer trail I knew well, when I saw something through the trees. Light. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, maybe the moon catching on metal. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was firelight. I stopped. The woods don't have streetlights. If you see light in the middle of nowhere, it means someone put it there. I moved carefully, stepping slow, quiet. The trees thinned, opening up into a small clearing. And that was when I saw it. A shanty town. It wasn't much. Just a cluster of makeshift shelters, built from scrap metal, tarps, old bed sheets stretched between branches. A handful of them, enough for maybe a dozen people. And in the center, a fire pit. Someone had built it inside an old tire, a blackened ring of melted rubber curling around the flames. The fire was still burning, low but steady, casting flickering shadows on the shelters around it. But there was no one there, not a single person. I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring. Someone had made the effort to build this place. Someone had started a fire, but they were gone. The silence was wrong. I've been in the woods at night more times than I can count. I know what the dark sounds like. Wind through the leaves, distant owls, the rustling of small animals. Even when it's quiet, it's never this quiet. This was something else. The fire crackled softly. That was the only sound. No voices, no footsteps, no movement in the shelters, just emptiness. I forced myself to take a step closer, then another. The ground was packed dirt, littered with footprints. Lots of them, some old, some fresh. People had been here. Recently, I moved toward one of the shelters. It was just a lean-to made from plywood and a ratty blue tarp. A few old blankets were piled inside, a dirty plastic cup lying on its side next to them. Someone had been sleeping here. I checked another shelter. Same thing. Signs of life, but no life. Then I saw the pot. A small, dented pot sitting next to the fire, a thin layer of something still steaming at the bottom. Someone had been cooking, not hours ago, minutes. Something's wrong. My skin crawled. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. No movement. The fire was still going. The food was still warm. They had been here and then they weren't. Where the hell did they go? I took a step back, suddenly hyper-aware of how exposed I was. The only standing figure in a clearing full of abandoned things. I looked at the footprints again. They went in and out of the shelters. Some circled the fire. Some led toward the trees. And then I saw it. A cluster of prints, deeper than the rest. More pressed in, overlapping, as if a group of people had been standing right there. Watching, then gone. I don't scare easy. But something about this place, this moment, felt wrong. I've met people in the woods before, hikers, campers, sometimes people just looking to be left alone. But this wasn't like that. No one just leaves a fire burning. No one just abandons their food. Something made them leave. I felt it in my gut. I needed to go. I backed away, careful not to turn my back completely. The whole time, my brain screamed at me to run, but I didn't. Running makes noise. Running draws attention. I slipped back into the trees, moving slow, careful. And that's when I heard it. A branch snapping. Not behind me. Ahead. I froze. The sound was small, soft, but in the dead silence of the woods, it was deafening. Someone was out there. Someone was watching. I didn't wait. I turned and moved. Fast, quiet, the way I had come. Every step felt like something was crawling up my back, like I was being followed. I didn't look, didn't stop, just walked until the firelight disappeared behind me, swallowed by the trees. The hike back was a blur. Every sound made my pulse spike. I kept waiting to hear footsteps behind me, to see a shape in my peripheral vision, but I never did. I made it home just before dawn. I didn't go back. Not the next night. Not the next week. Not ever. I thought about it, though. About the shelters, the fire, the footprints. About the people who had been there and why they had left. And I thought about the noise in the trees. That tiny sound. That single snapped branch. Whoever was out there, they weren't part of the camp. They had been watching it just like I had. And they were still there. I never used to think twice about walking at night. The streets in our neighborhood were quiet, the kind of place where nothing really happened. We had lived there for a while, and my girlfriend and I had a routine. Every night after dinner, we'd take the dogs out for a walk. The air would be cool, the streetlights buzzing faintly overhead, the sound of our footsteps echoing against the pavement. It was peaceful. At least it used to be. That night, we had no reason to think anything would be different. No warning. No feeling of unease before we stepped out the door. But I think about that walk all the time now. And I think about how close we might have been to something much worse. We had 3 dogs between us. I handled 2 of them. The younger, stronger ones that pulled ahead with endless energy. While my girlfriend walked the 3rd, a retired service dog. He was older, calmer, and never caused trouble. He had been trained for years to be steady, reliable. Even in loud, chaotic environments, he never reacted to anything. That's why what happened next was so unsettling. We had been walking for about 15 minutes when we reached a turn in the road. I was a little ahead, maybe 10 or 15 feet, letting the dogs pull me forward. My girlfriend had slowed down behind me, not by much, just enough to let the older dog keep his own pace. I rounded the corner first, not thinking about anything. Just another night, another walk. I didn't know she had stopped. I didn't know she had seen him. It wasn't until later that she told me what had happened. There was a man near one of the houses just standing there. At first, she thought he was waiting for someone. Maybe a homeowner, maybe a friend coming to pick him up. But something about the way he moved was wrong. She watched him shift, glancing up at the windows, stepping closer to the side of the house, like he was trying to see inside, like he was checking if anyone was home. And then he noticed her. He turned, locking eyes with her. She had already been looking, so she couldn't just pretend she hadn't seen him. She did what felt natural, nodded politely, said hi. He took a step toward her. Before he could answer, before he could even open his mouth, the dog she was walking, the gentle, calm, never aggressive dog, growled. Not a small, warning growl, not something playful or uncertain. A deep, low, unmistakable threat. She was so surprised that she barely reacted. She had never heard him growl like that before. He was standing rigid, ears flat, head low, teeth slightly bared. Every muscle in his body was tight, as if he was ready to lunge. She stammered an apology, trying to defuse the situation. Sorry, he's a guard dog. She didn't know why she said it. It just came out. The man didn't laugh, didn't brush it off. He just looked at her. And then he said, well, he's doing a good job tonight. Flat, emotionless. Something about the way he said it made her blood run cold. She didn't respond, just tightened her grip on the leash and started walking, fast, catching up to me. She didn't want to turn her back, but she didn't want to keep looking at him either. She only looked back once. He was still standing there, still watching, the feeling. By the time she reached me, her breath was shaky. I didn't even notice at first. The dogs were still pulling at me, and I assumed she had just fallen behind because of the older dog's slower pace. But as soon as she reached me, she grabbed my arm. I looked over, confused. She didn't say anything right away, just whispered, "We need to get home." That was when I realized how pale she looked. She kept glancing over her shoulder. I followed her gaze, but I didn't see anyone. Nothing but the empty road behind us, the distant hum of streetlights, the silhouettes of houses against the dark sky. But something in her face told me everything I needed to know. She was scared, really scared. Getting home, we didn't run, but we walked fast, faster than usual. The dogs kept pace with us, oblivious. My girlfriend stayed close to my side, still gripping my arm, her eyes darting between every shadow, every parked car, every darkened doorway. I kept checking behind us, but I never saw him again. That didn't make me feel any better. When we reached our house, I unlocked the door as quickly as I could. My girlfriend stepped inside first, the dog right at her heels. I let the other 2 dogs in, then turned to look one last time. The street was empty, no movement, no strange figures. But that didn't mean he wasn't still out there, watching. We never walked that late again. Not together, not apart. Even during the day, we stayed more aware, scanning the streets, looking at every parked car, every stranger walking nearby. I don't know what that man was doing. Maybe he really was just standing there, just waiting for someone, and we overreacted. Or maybe he was looking for a house to break into. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me up at night, maybe he wasn't interested in the house at all. Maybe he was waiting for someone to pass by, someone alone, someone smaller. And if it hadn't been for that dog, if it hadn't been for the way he growled, maybe that night would have ended very differently. I've always loved hiking alone. There's something about being out in nature with no one around, just the sound of the wind in the trees and my own footsteps crunching against the dirt. It's peaceful. No distractions, no noise, no people. Just me and the trail. That's why I chose that particular hike, because it was off the beaten path. It was a lesser-known trail about 2 hours from where I lived. Not completely remote, but far enough away that I wouldn't run into crowds. The trail itself was about 12 miles round trip, cutting through dense forest and climbing up to a ridge with a great view at the top. I planned to do the full hike and be back to my car before dark. I left early in the morning, the drive smooth and quiet. I parked in a small, empty lot at the trailhead, checked my gear. Just a light pack with water, some snacks, a jacket, and my knife, and started walking. The first few miles were uneventful. The air was cool, crisp with the beginnings of fall. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the forest was full of that earthy, damp smell you only get this time of year. I didn't see anyone. Not unusual, but it still felt off. It was subtle at first, just a creeping feeling, the kind that makes you look over your shoulder even when you know nothing's there. I ignored it, kept walking, kept my pace steady. Then, around mile 5, I saw him. At first, he didn't seem out of place. Just another person on the trail, standing a little ways off in the trees. Maybe 20, 30 feet away. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, half hidden behind a tree. His clothes were strange. Too many layers for the weather. A big jacket over what looked like old, stained pants. The colors all mismatched, thrown together like an afterthought. His posture was stiff, his head tilted slightly. Something about him didn't feel right. I kept walking, didn't stop, didn't slow down. I didn't make eye contact, but I knew he was watching me. I could feel it. The further I went, the worse the feeling got. I checked over my shoulder a few times. Nothing. The man hadn't followed. But that unease stayed with me, curling in my stomach like something heavy. At the top of the trail, I took a break, drank some water, ate half a protein bar, tried to shake the feeling, tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Then I started back down. About a mile into the descent, I saw him again. He was farther down the trail now, standing just off to the side, waiting. I didn't stop, didn't acknowledge him. I just kept walking. My heartbeat was faster now, my body tense. The weirdest part? He wasn't moving. Not toward me, not away. Just standing. Like he was letting me come to him. Like he was waiting for something. I picked up my pace, my boots hitting the dirt harder now. faster. And then, a few minutes later, I heard it. Footsteps behind me, not close, not running, just slow, steady steps, following at a distance. I didn't turn around, didn't want to see. My breathing was tight now, my hands clammy despite the cool air. I wasn't far from my car, maybe a mile, maybe less. Just keep walking, just get to the car. But the footsteps stayed, not gaining, not falling back, just following. I started moving faster, almost a jog now. My boots slipping on loose dirt, my breath coming quicker. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I rounded a bend in the trail, then another. The parking lot was close now, I could feel it. Then I heard something that stopped me cold. The footsteps stopped too. Not a second later, not a moment after mine. They stopped at the exact same time, like whoever was behind me wanted me to know. I didn't think. I ran. I don't remember the last stretch of the trail. Just my own breath, my own pounding steps. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I broke through the trees into the parking lot, my car sitting right where I left it. The lot was still empty. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking, breath coming too fast. I got the door open, slammed it shut, locked it, sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to calm down. I forced myself to look up, to check the trail. No one was there, no footsteps, no movement, nothing. I sat there for a long time, heart hammering, waiting for something. But the man never came out of the woods. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know what would have happened if I had stopped. But I never hiked alone again. I don't know why I agreed to it. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe I was just tired of the noise of everyday life. Or maybe I was just being stupid. Either way, when my friend Matt told me about his uncle's cabin and how he needed someone to watch over it for a week, I said yes. The idea of being alone in the woods didn't scare me at first. I'd gone camping before, spent nights outdoors, and I figured a week away from work and distractions would be good for me. No emails, no meetings, no people. Just me, a few books, and the sound of nature. But the moment I turned onto that dirt road leading to the cabin, something felt off. The trees pressed in too close. The road was barely wide enough for my car. The sun was starting to set, and the light filtering through the trees cast long shadows that made everything look stretched and distorted. I told myself it was just the unfamiliarity of the place getting to me. I kept driving. After a few more miles, the cabin came into view. It was smaller than I expected. Just a simple wooden structure with a sagging porch and a single window on the front. There was no other house for miles. No cell service either. My bars had disappeared almost an hour ago. I parked, got out and stretched. The air was cool, thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. The silence was absolute. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, no planes overhead, just trees. I grabbed my bag and headed up to the porch. The key was right where Matt said it would be, under a loose board near the door. The lock was stiff, the door heavier than it looked, but it creaked open after a few tries. Inside, the air was stale, like no one had been there in a while. The cabin was one large room, bed in the corner, small kitchenette, a wooden table with 2 chairs. There was a fireplace, a few oil lamps on the shelves, and a single door leading to what I assumed was the bathroom. It wasn't cozy, but it was enough. I set my bag down, checked the supplies Matt had left: canned food, bottled water, a flashlight with extra batteries. There was no electricity, just an old propane stove for cooking and a pile of firewood stacked against the wall. I lit a fire, made some soup, and ate in silence. Outside, the trees swayed slightly in the wind. I tried to let the quiet relax me, but it didn't. Felt wrong, like the forest was watching. I woke up to a sound. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. I lay still, listening. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in a dull red glow. Then I heard it again. A soft, deliberate crunch outside. Footsteps. I held my breath. The sound moved, circling the cabin. Slow, careful, not an animal. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. The only weapon I had was a hunting knife Matt had left in one of the kitchen drawers. Another step, closer now. Then it stopped. I strained my ears, waiting. Nothing, just silence. After what felt like an eternity, I let out a slow breath. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind shifting the leaves. I told myself that over and over, but I didn't sleep again that night. Morning came and everything looked normal.
No footprints.
No sign that anyone had been out there. I told myself I had overreacted. I spent the day keeping busy, chopping wood, checking the nearby stream for fresh water, trying to enjoy the solitude. But the feeling never left. The sense that I wasn't alone. That night, I locked the door, bolted the windows, kept the knife within reach. It didn't help. The knocking started just past midnight. Soft, slow. Knock, knock, knock. Not at the door, at the window. I froze, my breath stuck in my throat. The window had no curtains, no way to block out whatever was outside. I didn't move. The knocking came again. I forced myself to look. Nothing, just the darkness pressing against the glass. I sat in bed, gripping the knife, waiting. The knocking never came again, but I didn't sleep. I woke up exhausted, every muscle tense. I stepped outside, scanning the ground, and then I saw them. Footprints.
Bora.
Human, circling the cabin. My stomach dropped. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been out there, watching me. I packed my things in under 10 minutes. I grabbed my keys, threw open the car door. The engine wouldn't start. I tried again. Nothing. I popped the hood. The battery cables were gone. Not loose. Gone. A sound behind me. A soft rustling in the trees. I turned, scanning the forest. Nothing. But I knew someone was there. Watching. Waiting. I grabbed the knife and backed toward the cabin. If I couldn't leave, I needed to survive the night. I barricaded the door, stacked furniture against it, kept the knife in my hand. The knocking started at midnight, not just at the window this time. The walls, the door, soft, deliberate taps, like they were playing with me. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the doorknob turned. Slow, testing. I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles turned white. The sound stopped. Silence. Then footsteps, leaving, circling, fading into the woods. I didn't sleep, didn't move, just waited for morning. First light, I ran. I didn't pack, didn't look back, just sprinted down the dirt road, heart hammering. I ran for almost an hour before I saw another car. An older man driving a pickup. He slowed when he saw me, eyes wide. I must have looked insane. He drove me to the nearest town. I called Matt, told him everything. He didn't sound surprised. Yeah, he said after a long pause. My uncle stopped going up there too. I never asked why. I didn't want to know. I never went back. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, when everything is too quiet, I swear I still hear knocking.